Hello everyone. The manly gesture that melts any woman and almost nobody uses. Female psychology. Let me ask you something a little different. When was the last time a woman looked at you and actually relaxed? Not smiled politely, not laughed at your joke, not responded to a compliment. I mean truly relaxed. Her shoulders dropped slightly, her breathing softened, something in her chest unwound, and without consciously knowing why, she felt safer standing next to you than she did a few minutes earlier. If you can't recall a specific moment like that, or if you're unsure what I even mean, then what you're about to read might be the most important thing you absorbed this week. Here's the strange part. What I'm about to describe isn't a pickup line. It's not a routine. It's not a trick you rehearse in front of a mirror. You won't find it in seduction manuals. In fact, most men who hear this will dismiss it as too simple. They'll go back to doing what they've always done and continue getting the same results. But a small percentage of men, maybe 5 or 10%, will feel something click. Not because they're more intelligent, but because they're finally ready to stop performing and start connecting. Those are the men women remember years later, and can't quite explain why. This goes deeper than you think. What this is really about isn't about seduction in the flashy, performative sense. It's not about becoming some polished, hyper-confident version of yourself that no woman can resist. That mindset, performance over presence, is exactly what creates the invisible wall between you and genuine connection. What we're talking about here is psychology, specifically, how the female nervous system processes emotional safety, trust, and attraction, and why those three are tightly intertwined. There's a particular gesture. I'm using that word loosely because it's less about a physical action and more about a way of being. When a woman experiences it, she doesn't consciously think, oh, he did that technique. She just feels different around you. She feels seen. She feels steady. She feels, often for the first time in a long time, like she doesn't have to manage the dynamic between you. And that feeling, that's where real attraction begins. Not just physical attraction, but the kind that makes her want to be around you. The kind that makes her think about you after you leave. The kind that makes her mention you to her friends without fully knowing why. There are 3 psychological principles behind this. Each one builds on the last. And the third? Most men actively avoid it, which is exactly why it's so powerful. No hype, no manipulation, just an honest look at what's actually happening beneath the surface. The biggest mistake men make before we talk about what works, let's talk about what doesn't. You've probably heard advice like, be confident, be high value, be a challenge, don't seek her approval. There's truth in these ideas, but the way most men apply them backfires quietly and invisibly. Most men treat attraction like a performance. They perform confidence. They perform indifference. They perform success, humor, leadership. Because somewhere along the way, they learned that women respond to what you project, so they project constantly. But here's the problem. Projection is exhausting, and she can feel it. Women are extraordinarily sensitive to authenticity, not because they're trying to catch you out, but because their nervous systems are wired to detect emotional congruence. Throughout history, misjudging a man's character carried serious consequences, so their perception evolved to scan for subtle inconsistencies. Even if she can't articulate it, she feels the difference between a man who is smething and a man who is trying to appear as something. When she senses performance, something in her stays guarded. You interpret that as, she's playing games, she's hot and cold, I can't figure her out. But often, what's really happening is simpler. Her nervous system hasn't been given enough reason to relax. The other extreme, emotional flooding. Some men realize performance doesn't work and swing the other way. They overshare, over-explain, over-communicate, make themselves endlessly available. They call it being real. Honesty is attractive, but anxiety disguised as vulnerability creates pressure. When openness comes from insecurity rather than groundedness, it feels like a request. Please manage my emotions, and responsibility kills attraction. Not because women are cold, but because being someone's emotional anchor before trust is built is exhausting. So now we have two extremes. Men performing strength they don't feel. Men oversharing vulnerability that feels unstable. But in between those extremes is a quiet, powerful space. That's where truly magnetic men live. Psychological trigger number 1. Unhurried attention. Most men misunderstand what women find attractive. They think it's what a man pays attention to: his goals, his ambition, his passions. Those matter. But what creates emotional pull isn't what you focus on, it's how you focus. Specifically, do you give her attention without agenda? Most men listen with a goal. They're searching for the right response, looking for signs of interest, thinking about what to say next. Their attention moves through her toward an outcome. But what she rarely experiences and instantly feels when she does is attention that actually lands. Listening to understand, not to respond. Looking at her because you genuinely find her interesting, not because you're evaluating her interest level. Unhurried attention has a specific quality. It's calm, it's spacious, it's not rushed or anxious. It silently communicates, I'm not trying to get somewhere, I'm just here. Psychologically, this activates the social engagement system, the part of the nervous system responsible for trust and openness. When that system switches on, she naturally opens up more, laughs more freely, moves closer emotionally and physically, not as a strategy, but as a biological response. Try this. Next time you're in conversation, stop rehearsing your next line. Let her words actually land. Allow a brief pause before responding, not to seem cool, but because you're genuinely processing. That small pause communicates more emotional intelligence than any clever line ever could. Women remember how you made them feel heard, not how impressive you sounded. Psychological trigger number 2. A frame that doesn't need approval. A truly attractive man has an internal frame, a stable sense of self that doesn't require validation. This isn't emotional coldness. There's a difference between a man who doesn't care because he's shut down and a man who doesn't need approval because he's secure. One feels dismissive, the other feels safe. When a man constantly adjusts himself based on her reactions, when his mood rises and falls with her responses, she starts to feel responsible for him. And responsibility dissolves attraction. A grounded man holds opinions lightly, is curious about disagreement, doesn't collapse when challenged, has direction in life that existed before her. He doesn't need her approval to feel okay. So when she disagrees or tests him subtly through provocation, indifference, or mild challenge, he stays steady. No defensiveness, no over-explanation, no sudden effort spike. That steadiness communicates something powerful. I know who I am, and that allows her to relax again. Psychological trigger number 3. Creating emotional safety without losing your edge. This is the core. The gesture itself is this. You make it safe for her to be fully herself without losing your own solidity. Not by agreeing with everything, not by removing all tension, not by performing sensitivity, but by consistently communicating. You don't have to perform here. You won't be judged. You won't be managed. I'm not easily threatened. I'm genuinely curious about who you actually are. What does this look like in practice? You don't flinch when she says something unexpected. You don't rush to fix or reassure. You're comfortable with silence. You ask one layer deeper questions from real curiosity. Most men treat silence as awkward, but silence with a grounded man feels like rest. Here's the key distinction. Emotional safety is not the absence of tension. It's trust with intention. You can disagree calmly, have standards, push back, take up space unapologetically. Safety without strength feels bland. Strength without safety feels intimidating. But when both systems activate at once, safety and stimulation, that's when attraction becomes powerful and memorable. The inner work known of this can be faked long-term. You can't manufacture groundedness. You can't perform genuine curiosity. You can't simulate internal security. These behaviors are expressions of inner work. So the real practice begins with awareness. How much of your attention is actually present? How much is self-monitoring? How often are you subtly anxious about how you're coming across? Real presence happens when self-monitoring fades, and that happens when your life has direction. Men who know what they value, what they're building, naturally feel grounded. They don't need to squeeze validation out of every interaction. So here's the practical advice. Build a life you're invested in. Develop a self that isn't contingent on one conversation. Practice stillness. Practice listening. Practice holding space without rushing to fix. These things compound. You're not trying to become an idealized version of yourself. You're becoming a more grounded, curious, present version of who you already are. At its core, the gesture is simple. See her clearly, let her be who she is, and remain fully, unapologetically yourself. Almost nobody does this. The final truth about attraction attractant is not a performance review. She's not scoring you on how perfectly you delivered a line or how long you held eye contact. Attraction is an emotional experience, and emotional experiences follow a different logic. They respond to authenticity, not performed authenticity, but real congruence. When a woman encounters a man who has stopped auditioning and started being, the contrast is immediate. Her nervous system registers it before her mind does. And what happens? She relaxes. That softening isn't weakness, it's trust. And creating that environment not through manipulation, but through presence is real masculine value. The men who understand this stop chasing attraction. They generate it. Because the most powerful gesture in any room isn't the loudest or the flashiest. It's the one that makes the person next to you feel like they don't have to pretend. Most people will never offer that. You can.